get started whenever you're ready, Jeff.
No, kitty. Okay, hang on.
Kitty
Never mind.
cats,
I
kitty
thought this
cats,
was going to be possible, but no. No, kitties, no. All right,
Oh,
hang on.
kitty,
Give me a second.
kitty cats, kitty cats, kitty cats. Oh, lollipop.
Sorry, I love you, but no.
They're like, but we love you more, Jeff. We love you so much more.
I love you. Get out. Get out. Oh, hello, and welcome to our very first bonus episode of Into the Fold. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Juliana, and today we are talking about a very special and fun event that Jeff and I both got to attend and are really grateful that was even put on. It was a Zoom interview that Leigh Bardugo did. It was with the Faulkner literary the Faulkner Foundation, and they have a series of online webinars and seminars that they're doing called their Literary Conversations, and their first one was with none other than the fabulous Leigh Bardugo.
This is going to be a little different from our usual format because we don't have our usual segments ready.
No.
We attended this seminar and we thought it was just so great. We wanted to share our thoughts with you guys about what we saw. And we've mentioned this before, but we do need to let you guys know that since the conversation between Leigh and the representative from Faulkner was not spoiler-free, unfortunately, our discussion is also not going to be spoiler-free. So if you have not read, I would say pretty much the entire Grishaverse novels, like all of them.
I would say like literally everything.
Yeah, literally everything. So there are just spoilers for the entire series abound. I think they tried to quell it up to a certain point, but there are just, you could tell that this is a conversation that was intended mainly for people who have really gotten into the series and have read everything.
Yeah, because the woman who was interviewing Leigh definitely is a big fan of Leigh Bardugo and the books, and also had done her research, and she knew everything, and I could see that both of them were trying not to be huge spoilers because they knew people were there who probably have only seen the show or haven't gotten through all the books yet, and they did a decent job of not being super spoiler heavy, but they definitely let a few things through the cracks, and Jeff and I will definitely be letting things run through the cracks while we're talking about this.
So the main point, I think, of this conversation was not only to unpack the Grishaverse, but really to talk about adapting a literary universe for the big screen and to kind of give an idea of how different that can be. The first thing that they did at the top of the conversation was Leigh Bardugo herself read a passage from Shadow and Bone, the part where we meet the Darkling for the first time. And then they showed us a clip from the Shadow and Bone Netflix series where you see what that moment looked like when they adapted it for the screen.
It was fabulous. This woman can read me her books any day of the week. It was so wonderful and gave me so many goosebumps. Just hearing the author herself read the books that she has written, just with such reverence for what she's written, and also just she's just so fabulous. And I know at the end she even said, she's like, I feel like other people read it better than me and other people don't really want to hear me read it, something along those lines. And I was like, I want to hear you read it any day of the week.
Yeah, me too, because the gist I think she was getting at is that she's not an actress. Even when there isn't a camera in front of her, she doesn't consider herself an actress, which honestly, I feel that because I'm not an actor. Like, I don't feel like I should be professionally doing acting. Like, it's fun to do sometimes just for fun, but like nobody should be paying me to do that. And Leigh Bardugo, I think that was her point, is that she's not an actress or a professional narrator, but at the same time, it's always great to hear the author reading something to you that they wrote. Because if two different people, whether they're professional readers or not, read you something and one of them is the person who wrote it, then the person who wrote it is going to give you an interpretation of how it felt to them when they put it down.
Yeah. And you could feel that emotion just radiating out of her as she was reading it. And it was just so fabulous and such a good way to start off the discussion that they had. And I was just really excited to hear everything else that they were going to say after that. And you could tell that the woman who was interviewing Leigh was also kind of shooketh from listening to her as well. And it was just
Well,
so...
I don't blame her. I would have been nervous as to speak to Leigh Bardugo, especially if I'm in a situation like that where it's my responsibility to facilitate a good discussion and kind of help guide the discussion towards important questions about her work.
Yeah.
Like, what am I going to get Leigh Bardugo to think about in terms of her own work that she hasn't already thought of?
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's the responsibility of this interviewer to ask the questions that she thinks the listeners want to hear, and those questions that we haven't had answered yet. That's a big portion of what you do as an interviewer, Jeff. But we started off with some really great questions from the interviewing. I'm so sorry. I don't know the name of the woman who interviewed her. Did we write it?
Unfortunately, I don't remember her name either.
We will just say she did a lovely job.
She did a great job.
I know she is a host for one of the major pop culture NPR podcasts, so she comes from a place of experience with things like this.
One of the first things the interviewer asked Leigh about was the difference between how Mal reacted to Alina being taken away in the book versus how he did it in the show.
Yeah.
Because in the book, as we've talked about here before, we have no idea. He's nowhere to be found. They whisk her away, and as far as we know, he doesn't care. But they specifically made a point in the show of showing Mal running after her, trying to stop it from happening. And when she's in the tent being tested by the Darkling, he is not letting the healer do their job. He is fighting like hell to get away from them and try to find out what's happened to her. So they have really... They didn't take away the whole Mal is sexy and he knows it thing, but they definitely made a point of making Mal somebody who thinks about Alina as much as she thinks about him.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear about these changes and why and how they were made from the book to the show, because it seems like a lot of the changes that happened in that transition were because you're taking a first-person perspective book to a kind of overarching, like, seer of all perspective in the show, where you're bouncing around from whose narrative you're following as you're going. And it would be really boring as a show to just follow Alina the whole time and not get any stories from anyone else. And then also it wouldn't give us the opportunity to get the Crow's storyline, which we love, Jeff. We love the Crow storyline. And
we do. And we've talked about before, I think, in our earlier episodes where we're kind of dissecting the Orishaverse a little before we got into the book Shadow and Bone, I think we talked about how most people actually started with Six of Crows before they ever read Shadow and Bone.
Yeah.
So that, I think, was one of the things. I can't remember if she actually said that or not. I want to say she mentioned something about how she knew that most people entered into this fictional universe she created with Six of Crows, so she knew it was important to make sure that they were in there. Otherwise, not as many people might have given it a shot in the first place.
Yeah, I think she did say that, and I fully agree with that, too. I definitely have met a lot of people like yourself, Jeff, who have started with Six of Crows, and I can definitely see this show having a much, much, much smaller audience if the Six of Crows storyline wasn't in there. And that is actually a good transition to the next point that we have, is that someone asked about what the decision-making process was behind adding the Six of Crows storyline into the Shadow and Bone storyline. And we learned that Eric, the showrunner, was actually the one who pushed the two stories to be together in one series. And he and Leigh worked together when they were trying to come up with the pitch for Netflix. And I think that's really interesting that it wasn't actually Leigh who was the big proponent of pushing these two storylines kind of into one, but it was actually the showrunner, who I'm assuming is probably a pretty big Six of Crows fan in some capacity. So shout out to Eric, the showrunner.
That was definitely brought up. Eric is a huge fan of the Grishaverse, which is another part of why it was so important for her that they worked together very closely on the project, because she mentioned specifically she knows the series has a life of its own and that she'll have to let it go and let the books be the books and the show be the show, because she also points out in this interview that more people have already watched the Netflix show than are ever going to read these books that she wrote. So she knew that there were going to be changes and compromises that she might not necessarily agree with, that maybe she would, maybe once she saw it and saw how people reacted to it, she would be okay with it. And even if she wasn't, she admits herself that there's probably going to be a lot more divergence from the source material going forward, and she's just going to have to accept that these two things can coexist.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a nice, refreshing change of tone, Jeff, especially given that you and I both kind of originate from the Harry Potter fandom as a general rule of thumb. And that author is very inflexible when it comes to things like this, and just accepting that, hey, it might not be my exact canon, but it's still a valid storyline. And Myrtle has decided that she wants to run around.
Hi, Myrtle. For anybody listening who still does not know, Myrtle is Juliana's dog. She is the official pod pup, and we love her to death.
Yeah, and she's trying to be nosy and see what's going on outside. Yeah, sit on the couch, my friend.
Fun fact, I was debating, when we sat down to record this bonus thingy, I debated leaving the door open to the room that I record in and just letting my cats come in. One of my cats was willing to sit in my lap and be quiet. One was sleeping in the sun over by the window, but one of them was climbing up on my desk, nudging my microphone, stepping on my keyboard, and I just thought, no, I cannot deal with this. So I had to kick them all out just to make sure I'm being fair to all of them.
Be gone, kitties. Yeah, Myrtle has settled herself over here on the couch and she's being quiet, so we'll let her be there for now. She's become a good pod pup, because when I first started podcasting, she would just run around my legs and slam her tail on the desk that my computer is on the whole time, and that was not conducive to podcasting. So here we are.
But getting back to the conversation with Leigh Bardugo, you know what I thought of when she was talking about how she has to let these two, like the show and the books, simultaneously exist and just be okay with the differences? I actually thought of What If, the Marvel show that's doing so well on Disney Plus right now.
Yes, I just watched the last episode. It was great.
Anytime something gets adapted that is different from the source material, I've learned to think of it like a multiverse.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned we're Harry Potter universe people, so we don't necessarily have to like the movies. If you don't like them, don't watch them. I think most people in the Harry Potter fandom would say books over movies, or both. Yeah. I don't know anybody who has ever said movies over books. But
I'm sure they're out there, but I don't know them personally.
Sure. But Leigh Bardugo also says all adaptation is fan fiction. That was something else she said that stuck with me from this interview. So I'm thinking, even if they adapt something that is written and it's different, that's okay. I think where people get upset with it is when they want the adaptation to be as good as the books so they can love them equally. They don't necessarily want to accept a world where two different interpretations of the same thing exist and only one of them is good. But What If shows you specifically with things that exist a certain way, what would happen if they worked out differently. And it's my understanding that a lot of those changes that they're making into whole episodes of that show are changes that have also been fleshed out in the comic books. I
Yeah,
mean,
a lot of
anybody
them
who's
are
read a
pulling.
comic book for a character like Batman, for instance, Batman has existed for decades, and they've done so many different story arcs with Batman, and they would contradict each other all over the place. That's why the concept of a multiverse to me is so appealing. You have one
Mhm.
storyline where things happen the way they happen in the books. You have one storyline where they happen the way they happen in the show, and it's okay.
Yeah, I think the main thing to take home is that the books obviously are the canon. Like, they are the canon, and then everything else is fan fiction, but all of it's equally enjoyable. All of it's equally as fun to consume. All of it is equally just as wonderful. So, if you enjoy the quote unquote fan fiction interpretations that are the Netflix show, that's great. They're fun. We love it. If you just like the regular canon, that's also great. We love it. If you like the fan fiction about the Darkling and Valerie, or whatever her name was, going to the coffee shop, sounds good to me. We're behind
That
it.
sounds right.
But it's just, I think it's just the acceptance of the Leigh is promoting the acceptance of these other things as just as much fun to consume as her writing. And it is great for her to see that, like, hey, all these people are watching the show, more people than will ever read the books, but by them watching the show, it's getting her obviously money and exposure as well too. So for her, that's great. If people are watching the show, even though it's not like strictly canon, it's still fabulous that she's getting that exposure and her characters are getting a light to shine in. So I'm behind it, Jeff.
Me too. Now, I did laugh when she got to the point where she said she feels bad for people who are new to the books after watching the show.
Yeah.
And there's tons of people who are like that.
Some of our friends.
She mentions herself that just the first season, more people have already watched it than are ever going to read the book. So there have to be people who are going to these books and saying, okay, I got to see where this thing came from.
Yeah.
And for a lot of those people, she said she feels bad.
I know specifically some of our friends, Jeff, like Ev, and I think Mel was in this boat initially too. They were confused as to who these other people were, the Six of Crows friends, like who they were, because they had read like a little bit of Shadow and Bone, but they hadn't gotten any concept for the Six of Crows people, which I'm sure that the people who are coming in just reading Six of Crows are also thinking about the Shadow and Bone people. Who the heck are these people? Why are they here? I thought I was getting just this storyline. So I think it's probably confusing a few people, which is interesting. But
yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. If anybody watched Shadow and Bone and fell in love with Kaz and Inej and Jesper, and then they go to read Shadow and Bone and they get all the way through the book and they're like, wait, what happened to the crow people? Why weren't they here?
I know someone had that reaction, Jeff. I can't remember exactly who it was, but someone told me that exact story where they got to the end of the books and they were like, why did we never meet Kaz? I was like, because he's not part of that book series.
Did they really make it all the way to the end before they started to wonder that? Because based on how intertwined the stories were, I would have thought that they would have been at least halfway into the book and wondered why there were no crow scenes yet.
I want to say it was Jen, honestly, because she read the books in like 3 days. Like all of them. She read them like
now
one
that
day.
I do remember. That was really fun to hear that she got so deep into the books that she read them all that quickly.
Yeah, so I think that actually might have been her because she was just like banging them out,
and
then realized after the fact. So I mean, if you speed read the books, then kudos to you, honestly. But
yeah.
So I was gonna say, one of the interesting parts about having a show made about a book is that you get to cast that show with actors and actresses, and number one, you get reactions from the fans. Something
you were right. I was gonna say the same thing.
Jeff, we are on the same page.
Wow.
Welcome to Jeff and Juliana's Friendship Corner. Jeff and Juliana's Friendship Corner.
No, that's where we talk about a movie that we watched that doesn't have any direct bearing on the Grishaverse because it's fun.
But this is still friendship,
or whatever.
Jeff. This is still a friendship bonding experience. But yes, I was going to say that you get to cast the show, and the first thing that you get is the reactions from the fans and the readers, either being like, oh my gosh, this is exactly how I imagined this person, or how could they ever cast this person? They look nothing like what they look like in my head. And I know it, and Leigh said specifically that the actress who plays Inej is exactly how she pictured her. And she said when she was looking through the casting things, because casting actually does a lot of the legwork before anyone's face or name gets to Leigh or any of the higher ups. They really whittle it down to like 5 or 6 people, and then they send the higher up people those tapes and everything. So I know that it's not, they're not like looking through like a million people. That's the casting people, but Leigh's not looking through a million people. But when she was looking through the actresses who were vying to play Inej, she found the one that she liked, but she was thinking to herself, oh, please don't be terrible, because you look exactly like I want Inej to look, but I really would like you to be a great actress as well. And we both know that actress actually, she's fabulous. And I love the actress who plays Inej.
She's exactly what I pictured as well. And a lot of people, like, I knew casting directors were a thing. I didn't know exactly how important it was to have casting directors and all of these other different levels and roles in making a TV show. But that's one of the things that I've learned from listening to the Office Ladies podcast and the Deep Dive, the Office Deep Dive with Brian Baumgartner, is they actually talk to a lot of those people. And when they explain what their job is, it's an important process. It has to, especially with something like this that has the potential to be so huge, not only for Leigh, but for Netflix, for the publishers of the book, for the actors who might potentially take on these roles. You need to make sure that you're choosing the people who are going to take on these roles very, very carefully. Because even for the people, like Leigh mentioned, who watch the show and then go back to the books, those people, this is the image that they're going to have. That was something that I was a little bit surprised didn't come up, is people who have an image in their head from reading the books of what the character should look like and then judging whether or not the adaptation matches up to that, versus people who watch the show first, so they have an image going in of what the characters already are going to look like, but does what they do in the books
match how
add
they
up?
Are in the Yeah, that's definitely an interesting concept, Jeff. I would say that for the most part, most of the people that were cast, for me personally, I definitely could see them in that role. They might not have been exactly how I pictured them, just because, like, for the Darkling, for instance, for me, in my head, he's very inhuman. He's like almost, he's almost like a mannequin-esque because he's so inhuman. But obviously Ben Barnes is a person.
Ben Barnes looked like he just walked out of a cologne ad for Christian Dior.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like he probably has done at least 5 of those ads already, Jeff. But
he's so great at acting. It's a different interpretation of the character, but then again, he is an actor. He should be allowed within reason. Within reason, they should give him some room to put his unique stamp on the character, because the character of the Darkling is iconic, honestly.
Well, yeah, and he makes it work.
So, yeah, he does make it work. And any version of that character, whether it's close to the book or not, is going to be something that's going to stay with people for a while. So it's not like he just got the part of, yet another guy in a romantic comedy who you think things aren't going to work out with the girl, but then at the last minute they do, and then they're happy forever, the end. No, this is a character that has a lot of layers to him, the potential for several seasons, and this is a character that is going to need to be very, very nuanced. And some of those nuances are part of what the actors get to control when they bring those characters to life.
Yeah. And, I mean, that's just a general conversation that you and I could have on another time, about the difference between the characters, how they're portrayed in the show and how they are portrayed in the book.
Oh yeah, we could go character by character on that. We could do a whole series of episodes like that.
Oh, yeah, easily.
Oh,
I
and
would
that'd be
say
fun.
for sure fun. It was interesting too to hear a little bit more about the audition process as well. And it was interesting because to make sure that there was no leaks, they actually had the actors read scenes directly from the book and not from the scripts that they had created for the show, which
I thought that was clever.
yeah, it's a great idea because obviously the scripts are in some way an adaptation of what's written in the books. So it's not too far off. And there are obviously speaking scenes within the books themselves. So you could pull from those. And I think that's probably what they did. But that just makes it kind of foolproof that if something leaks, then it's not anything that we haven't had access to for this whole time anyway. So definitely very smart on their end.
It makes me wonder if anybody else does that, because especially as people get more tech savvy and information travels much, much faster, and it becomes much, much harder to keep things like that from getting out because of how accessible they are. It makes me wonder if I don't think they could have possibly been the first show adapted from a book to try that. So it makes me wonder, did they just come up with that idea like somebody else already did? Or is this one of those times where somebody more experienced said, okay, we can't give them the script because it might get out. So we need to give them something else to read. And then someone said, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we give them scenes from the book?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Now that I know those auditions are out there, I want to see those audition tapes.
Well, we kind of got like a little bit. I don't know if you saw the Nikolai ones, because I saw a few of the Nikolai ones when they were out on the internet in the wild, and they have since gotten taken down. But I did get to see 3 people.
No,
I genuinely don't know who the actors were, and none of them were like, wow to me. But I have very high standards for who I want to play Nikolai, and I don't know who it would even be. I know that was it when we were talking with our friends from that pretentious book club, and they brought up the guy who has the mischievous eyes. There was someone who brought up something, and I was like, oh yeah,
I don't know. I didn't actually get to watch those auditions when they were out, so now that they're down, I'm not going to get to see them. And honestly, they were probably not. Were they very good quality?
No, they were just like self tapes.
Okay, well then there you go. I want to see the actual audition tapes. Like I want to see the ones that the casting directors were going back over. I know that sometimes when they put out DVDs of things, sometimes they put those out as like bonus features. Like I remember specifically watching a screen test with Anna Paquin and Hugh Jackman back when they were making the first X-Men movie.
Oh boy.
It was a kind of an eye-opener because that was the first exposure I had to Hugh Jackman was him as Wolverine. So every time I saw him after that, I compared him to this very muscular dude who always had a cigar, I feel like, and had this very specific haircut. And then they show him in this audition tape sitting next to a girl, and he's dressed like a trucker. Like he's not even dressed for work. Like it doesn't even look like, I don't even remember, and there may have been a reason for it, but he's doing a screen test with Anna Paquin, and I'm thinking they picked him to be Wolverine based on this? Interesting.
I feel like that's kind of the equivalent of seeing your teacher at the grocery store wearing regular clothing. Or when I see the people I work with who normally wear scrubs all the time wearing jeans out at the grocery store, I'm like, whoa, hold on.
Right. Exactly.
You don't wear your other clothes all the time?
No, it's like seeing your teachers outside of school for the first time as a kid.
Yes.
But what I don't just want to see the audition tapes for the actors who did get picked. Like, I want to see them in combination with actors who didn't get picked.
Yeah. No,
I think that would be really fun. Also, I think what I really want, even if you don't give us the audition tapes, fine. Then just show us like what passages from the book that you had them do for scenes. Like you get the actors who are going to play the crows together in a room and you give them a scene to read. Okay, which one did you think would be the best one for that?
Yeah.
Surprisingly, I mean, nobody asked. That question didn't come up during the interview.
Yeah, well, it seems like there were a lot of questions that people had submitted in the questions box that the interviewer...
Oh, there were hundreds, I think they said. Mine was barely starting to actually get upvoted, because that was one of the things that actually bothered me about this interview was, I mean, I know that they have to pick somehow because all the questions aren't going to get answered. I get that. But they were saying that they were going to pick questions based on who had the most upvotes. And I didn't like that because I felt like the people who got their questions in early were automatically going to be in a better position to get upvoted, even if their questions, frankly, kind of sucked.
Yeah, I will say that definitely was one of the downfalls of this interview, was that there wasn't much time for listener questions. I will say that the interviewer, during her interviewing process, did a very good job of doing that. I think maybe where we could have saved time would have been, they showed some clips from the show, which maybe we could have foregone, just because I'm assuming that everyone who was watching this has seen the show already. So it was nice to hit home the point, but if we only had an hour to do everything, then I think it's nice that it would have been nicer to give that time to listener questions instead of watching little bits that we've already seen from the show. So they maybe could have allocated their time a little bit better, but definitely there was a shortage of listener related questions.
So we talked a lot already about Ben Barnes' interpretation of the Darkling. I really enjoyed hearing Leigh Bardugo talk about the Darkling because she said things that I feel like a lot of us have been thinking about the Darkling. I mean, we've seen the fan art, we've read the fan fiction, we know how people feel about Ben Barnes, and honestly, same, can't blame you for that. But the thing is, she compares the Darkling to Magneto, where she says that his cause is not unjust, but the way he goes about it makes you not really care about his cause because he really is indifferent to how many innocent people will suffer in the course of him trying to achieve that.
Yeah, exactly.
She does clarify that she was not trying to humanize him. Like, she wasn't trying to make him... She wasn't trying to make this character who's doing terrible things to people into somebody that you're meant to sympathize with.
Yeah. It just kind of happens.
She also... This made me laugh so much. This is a quote that I wrote down. She's like, "It's like calling someone Evil McStorm and then being like, wait, he's bad?" We literally just said this many times
I was just gonna
in the episode we already recorded today. His name is the Darkling. And
Alina is just like floored beyond belief that he could be doing anything dark or evil. How could he ever do anything dark or evil? The Darkling. It definitely... Because she was saying that because they named him General Kerrigan within the show context, and they make the the reveal that he is indeed the Darkling of these stories that created the Fold. But she's right. If he was called the Darkling straight out the gate, then everyone who was watching the show who hadn't read the books already would already be like, yeah, he's the bad guy.
See, that felt to me like taking advantage of a moment to hide something in plain sight better than she did before, though. And I think that's the point of what you were getting at. Because, I mean, we just said it several times. He's called the Darkling. There's no mystery in that name. It sounds like a bad guy's name. Her Evil McStorm comment kind of pokes fun at that. It's pretty obvious. So when they do the show over again, knowing there are going to be people who watch it that have not read these books, you make it, I think, still kind of obvious, but honestly, that might just be because I'm so familiar with these books before watching the show.
Yeah, I definitely heard from people who just watched the show and hadn't read the books yet that they actually were surprised that he was the Black Heretic and the Darkling. when it came to that point in the show, because he was named General Kerrigan instead of being called straight out the Darkling. And I think you're right too, Jeff, in the fact that she's kind of retconning herself in a way and making right, quote unquote, a wrong, quote unquote, that she made when she started writing the book. Because she was not shy to say that this was Shadow and Bone is definitely her first major book that she's written. And she has definitely evolved since that book and changed as an author as well. And I think part of what she did with that is recognizing a weak point in her written work and trying to make up for it or change it to the way that she wanted it to be in this show form.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense to me.
Now, there was one thing that I just want to briefly mention. She acknowledges, and I appreciated this. First of all, she talked a little bit about the decision to make Alina half Shu on the show. Apparently, I don't recall. I think she said that didn't really have anything to do with trying to explain why they cast the person that they did to play Alina.
Yeah.
And she acknowledges that there are critiques of their decision to take the character in that direction, which she considers those critiques to be valid. But she also talked about how she knows that there was a missed opportunity not exploring the connection between the fact that Bodkin is Shu and Alina is half Shu. Because I didn't even think about that. So I was glad they said it because I realized I completely missed that opportunity. What I was a little disappointed about was just the lack of Botkin in general, because you know how I feel about Botkin.
Oh, you love Botkin, Jeff.
I do. I love Botkin so much, and I thought that this was a character that it's a shame that I get them cutting down his character a little bit, but they give him like one scene in one episode, and he didn't feel at all like Botkin.
No, he didn't have that presence about him, that commanding, just bam in your face presence that
I'm going to be hard on you, but it's only because I care about you getting what you need to get out of this. It didn't really feel like that. But apparently they're going to work a little bit more of Botkin and the connection between Alina and Botkin into season 2, from what Leigh said. And I'm really, really excited for that.
Yeah, I think that'll be really exciting to hear from him a little bit more and get more of that interaction and storyline too, because we didn't really get anything at all. And I can tell you personally, Jeff, from trying to find some clip art, some screenshots of him from the show, there's like 2 because he's barely in it. So it was hard to find it. And yeah, I definitely would love to see more Botkin and Alina interaction and just more strong Botkin in this.
Now, there are a couple of things that I wrote down here when they got to the Q&A portion.
Yes.
That I thought were worth noting. At that point, I tried to just kind of sit back and enjoy the rest of the seminar. But since I knew that we were going to be having this conversation, I wanted to have a few things to be prepared to talk about.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
Well, any time that you listen to a Q&A between a celebrity and members of the audience have the chance to ask them questions, you can tell when the questions come up that they get all the time. In my experience, a lot of times the person answering the question will say, I actually get that a lot. But one of the things that she did say she gets asked about all the time is she going to write a third Crows book? Because we have 6 of Crows, and we have the sequel to that set is Crooked Kingdom. And according to her, she was going to write a third Crows book, but she changed her mind. She said at this point she does not want to, but she might change her mind again. Because the important thing especially for her at this point, because she has, rightfully so, I think, become such a huge name, and she's having all this success, which is really great to see, because we love that for her, that she even if that weren't the case, she's the kind of person who doesn't want to write a book just for the payday. And she knows that the Six of Crows set is the most popular set from the series, and she knows that the book would sell really well. But unless she feels like there's a genuine need to write another book with these characters, she's not going to write it just for the payday.
I mean, I can just speak for myself in saying that I feel that there is a genuine need for this, given the end of Rule of Wolves. I would love, 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 love a Six of Crows style heist picking up from where Rule of Wolves lands. And she's like setting it up though, so I don't understand how she's saying where I'm not going to do it. I understand that she's saying I'm not feeling it right now, and when I get to it I'm going to get to it, which, I mean, fine, torture me for this much longer. But
may I offer up an unpopular opinion?
Of course, Jeff. We are the home of hot takes here.
I would prefer that they not.
Why? I need to know why then.
Because we're never going to get everything that we want from this. She has to leave some things open to the imagination, which is why some things don't get resolved. Like the end of Crooked Kingdom, for instance. We know, and some of these characters come up again in Rule of Wolves, we know that Jesper and Wylan are living together with Wylan's mom. We know that Kaz is now back in business, and Inej is not his spider anymore. She's off to be free, but we know that there's still the potential for them to be together as much as two people in their positions are capable of being. We know that Nina has gone off on her mission that we see in the next set, the King of Scars duology. So we see a little bit more of what happens with her. So everybody's not in a perfect place. They may not even be where we necessarily want them to be. And we might want so much to see what comes after that. But if she writes that into existence, then it's solid. It's done. It's fixed. It is what it is. But as long as she does not do that, then in our imagination, there's the potential for anything we want to happen. That's where headcanon really kicks in and saves the day. The rest works itself out however you imagine it does, and then you make it make sense to you.
See, I don't necessarily want closure. I am here for the adventure that would ensue after this book. Like, I'm here. I don't want closure on what's happening, which is a weird thing for me to say, Jeff. I know. On these books, like, it would be nice, but the way that King of Scars leaves us, like, she's set us up for another heist, and like, that's what I want. I want this like heist adventure story that's like full of crazy twists and turns and all that, and I want to go on that ride. That is what I want.
Well, I'll tell you one thing she could do.
Is write that book. She's written
one set of short stories already. It's fairy tales that are inspired by existing fairy tales, but set in the universes that she has already created in all these different countries. But what other authors have done is they have either released novellas, so shorter length novels, or collections of short stories that take place within the literary universes they've already created, like Victoria Aveyard's Red Queen series. She's written some novellas and short stories that take place in her series that's 4 books long. Mm-hmm. Some of them have a direct bearing on the canon. Some of them are prequel information. Some of them are things that happen after the fact, I think. So if she wanted to do some more stuff with the crows without putting them into one giant novel that is going to take her a long time to complete, if she had any ideas for like Kaz has a job and he goes over one night and he tells Jesper and Wylan, I need you guys to do this job with me. I'm bringing in some guys from out of town. I don't know if I can trust them or not, so I definitely need you guys there. And the mission goes badly wrong, but it's still exciting enough and has enough of the charm of the Six of Crows crew that it's something that you would want to read. That would be just one. She could do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely be interested in hearing about that too. Like, I'm fine with that. She left us in King of Scars with many cliffhangers and many directions where the story could go off in. And I love the storylines that she creates and kind of the chaos and the unpredictability and just how sassy everyone is. I'm here for the sass too.
Me too.
So much
You
sass.
didn't do this, but sometimes this does happen with people who just continuously demand more from authors when they don't want the universe of books they live in to come to an end, or they feel like some things are still unresolved, is that they start to make the author feel obligated to create it just because they want more content to consume, which is dangerously close to writing a book just for the payday. I don't think she should also write stories just because people really, really want them, because we are her fans. We love what she has made, but at the end of the day, she is an independent person who owes us nothing.
Yeah. And it is up to her to decide what she wants to do and what she doesn't want to do. Obviously, she's her own person. So, and the fact that she is also creating the Ninth House sequel right now, too. So she's pretty occupied with that. So it's not like she's saying, hey, I'm never going to write again. I'm not writing anything. She's actively writing another book for us. And that's something to be thankful for.
Yeah, and even after the sequel to Ninth House is published and the TV series could potentially be really incredible, there's more seasons of Shadow and Bone coming, although I think that she said she's going to take a less active role in that. But just consider other fantasy authors like Sarah J. Maas. She has written these fantasy series that have many, many books in them, and she has written a lot of different series. Like, it's insane the number of books that she's published, and she's still nowhere near done.
Yeah, I know. That's bananas.
So the way that I choose to look at it is the Six of Crows stories may be finished for now, but there was a time where I didn't know those existed. There was a time where they didn't exist, and then suddenly one day they were there, and they gave me something I love so much that I have it tattooed on my arm. So if she has the power to create something that great, imagine if I just, step back, let her have her breathing room, and just see what she comes up with next. It might be as good. Dare I say it, it might be even better. I'd say she set a pretty high bar, so I don't know how likely it is that it'll be better, but it could at least be as good. Yeah. So just wait and see what she comes out with.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, too.
I know that one other question that came up that was about something that we've talked about. I know that you, we're getting close in our regular episodes to the point where Alina is going to have the Moritz of a Stag collar put around her neck.
Yeah, and in the book, it is placed around her neck.
It's just a collar that's put around her neck, but
it's
in the show...
It's like a nice permanent necklace.
It's a collar, but in this, it's not a collar. It's more like a collarbone.
Ugh!
Yeah, because it becomes a part of you.
It just looks so nasty the way it's like part of her skin, and I just imagine even just wearing that prosthetic, I would feel so weird, and gonna if something catches, and I understand with the prosthetic, it's obviously not attached to Jessie May Leigh in the way it would be if it was actually under your skin. It's just kind of placed on top and there's makeup and other things on top of it. So if it
can you imagine what that wrist bracelet with the scales from the Sea Whip, if they've built this antler collar into her neck,
God,
what are they going to do to her wrist?
I don't even want to know.
It's going to look like she has grayscale. And if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, then you don't need to know what grayscale is. Unless you want to watch Game of Thrones, then we can talk about it.
No, I haven't. I'm not gonna. Not for now. No.
I don't recommend Googling grayscale.
Not gonna. No, I'm good. Honestly, Jeff, I've probably seen worse things at work. Let's be real here. But, yeah, I'm kind of tempted to Google it right now. You want my initial reaction? You're going to get my reaction. I'm going to look at it.
Oh, good.
Grayscale,
Juliana is going to Google grayscale from Game of Thrones. For the record, I told her not to do this. So whatever comes of it, comes of it.
It's just really dry skin. Like these people's like skin is turning into only pull back the affected area. You have to pull off your skin.
Yeah.
Ah.
The thing about grayscale is that it spreads very, very fast, and eventually it covers your entire body.
And you turn into a rock?
Not exactly.
You turn into a piece of pavement?
Try to be very, very careful about Game of Thrones spoilers here. I know Game of Thrones has been out for a very, very long time now, but we're here to discuss Shadow and Bone.
Okay. Oh, this guy looks like a goblin. They turn into stone people.
I bet I know who you're looking at.
Stone Man, Game of Thrones.
No.
There's also Stone Golem.
So getting back to the thing we actually came here to talk about. God, we are so bad about this.
Yeah, I will say though, just very quickly, Jeff, this isn't that disgusting. I've definitely seen worse things at work. Like, this is not bad in any capacity.
It's like, not...
Like, if I saw...
I'll tell you off show. I'll tell you off show.
I was gonna say, if I saw a resident with that, I would be like, yep, okay, someone get this guy some lotion.
Okay, I'll tell you off show.
Okay. Shall we wrap?
So
I think we're pretty much at the end, Jeff.
So just to kind of round it out, first of all, I'm a little disappointed that my question didn't get asked because I was looking forward to hearing the answer. I'm not trying to toot my own horn too much. Like, the question was groundbreaking. I just was really looking forward to hearing the answer. I wanted to know what she considers more difficult, killing her darlings or watching her villains thrive.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good question, Jeff.
Because I know that this is something that Leigh Bardugo is good at doing, and it's something that I know a lot of people I know who are interested in becoming published authors, like, they struggle with this. Because nobody likes seeing bad things happen to the characters that they love in books. But unfortunately, in order to be an author, you have to be willing to allow bad things to happen to your characters.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting,
in other words, you have to kill your darlings sometimes.
Well, she actually kind of did answer this a little bit, because one of the questions that they kind of alluded to, and they were being very, like, nondescript about it, but they were talking about how she killed off David and how she killed off Matthias, and how and why she did that, and her answer was, because I can. And that's a valid answer. She's the author. She can do whatever she wants.
Right. And she might like these characters, like, she might even love these characters, but her emotional response to the death of a character that she helped make might not necessarily be the same thing as ours.
Yeah, exactly. Because
she takes this journey in creating these characters and getting to know them as we do, but she may not be as attached to them. In fact, she might even be annoyed with them. Like, it's going to be a weird connection, but have you ever seen the movie Misery?
No.
Or read the Stephen King book?
No.
So the author in Misery, he has created this popular series of books. And if I remember right, the reason it's called Misery, it's actually, I think, supposed to be a dual meaning. It's misery because he ends up being miserable, and Misery is also the name of the main character from this series of books that he's written. But he decides to kill off the character so that he doesn't have to write the books anymore, and he's honestly happy about it. That way, he can move on to other things. Then he gets into a car accident. He ends up getting taken in by this very lonely, unstable, shut-in woman who's his biggest fan. And when she finds the manuscript of his latest book in his bag and reads it, she goes off the deep end that he has killed off this character that means so much to her. And then it becomes a hostage situation. She keeps him, like, tied up in her home and torments him into rewriting the character back to life. And sometimes when I see how strongly people react to the deaths of certain characters, especially characters that they love that have existed for several books, sometimes the reaction feels kind of that strong.
Yeah, definitely people. And I know even when I read the books, like, I cried when David died. Not as much Matthias, because I'm not, like, a huge Matthias stan. But David, even knowing, and I know you know this, Jeff, because I got spoiled because we do this podcast and I've seen fan art and things like that. I knew David's death was coming, but it still, like, hit me so hard reading that section of the book that people get emotional reading those things. And I can see why they would have those reactions to her killing off people that they really enjoyed reading about. So But that's like you said, that's being an author. You have to kind of be the orchestrator of life of the people within your universe that you've created. And one of the parts of life is death. And so that's it be what it be, Jeff.
There are some times where I feel like authors actually get a kick out of being able to control the lives of fictional people.
Oh, yeah, 100%. They get to play God all day long with these people.
There are probably interviews with George R.R. Martin where he addresses this, because I know that if anybody alive has to deal with this crap all the time, George R.R. Martin does, because I've heard him called the most notorious serial killer in fiction. And since we're not a Game of Thrones podcast, I'm not going to spoil anything about Game of Thrones, but I think even people who don't watch it or read it by this point, they know that it's a running gag,
bloody.
pretty much, that anybody you get attached to in that series who is decent is going to end up dead. And for that reason, a lot of people, I think, refer to George R.R. Martin as the most notorious serial killer in fiction. But he clearly has no qualms about killing off characters. I don't think I would make this up, but he even mentions... and Leigh Bardugo, I think, may have even said something similar in this interview, but it's something to the effect of... they're at war all the time. They are never not at war. And when you're at war, that's what happens. Good people who don't deserve to die end up dead. The difference here is that you've gotten to know these characters, you've taken this journey with them, you've become emotionally invested in them, so when you see their death, it affects you. But they aren't the only ones who died. Thousands of nameless, faceless characters in this book also died, and those things didn't affect you. Or maybe they did, but for the most part, probably not as much.
Yeah. I think people just have emotional connections to these characters, I can speak for myself too, like as I do. And you react with emotions when you have an emotional connection to someone, so
of course
it's understandable.
Now, the last thing that I want to say before we wrap this up, because I just thought this was so cute and so funny. This was a question that I do think needs to be asked every time an interview like this comes up, just because it's always fun to hear the answer. Because, when you work on a TV show or a movie, especially if it's adapted from something that you created, you take a little something with you when you go. So they wanted to know from Leigh Bardugo, did she get to keep anything from the set of Shadow and Bone Season 1? If you've seen the show, then you will recall there was a moment where David comes out of the coach and he throws a book at Jesper. And this was a fan catch that went crazy on the internet. People noticed that it was a Ravkin edition of Shadow and Bone. Mm-hmm. So she kept that. And apart from that, she also kept little things like cards and poker chips from the casino at the Crow Club. Because, why not?
Yeah, those are things that obviously are probably going to get thrown away anyway. Like, let's be real here. No one's keeping all the poker chips from the Crow Club. They'll keep some of them, but for the next season. But
nobody will miss them because there are so many cards and poker chips.
Yeah. It'll just be like, oh, okay, guess we need to order some more poker chips because some of them just went missing. Oopsie daisies.
Now, you know what I would do if I were her?
What?
I would take my Ravkin edition of Shadow and Bone. I would go around to all the cast members, and I would have them sign it like it was a yearbook.
Oh, that's a good idea, Jeff. That's a very smart idea. Use a smart boy.
Maybe she didn't, because God forbid anything from her home should ever go missing for any reason, because that... especially if that thing were to turn up at an auction someday, perhaps, like the Ravkin edition of Shadow and Bone from the show would be worth a lot. Oh, anytime authentic memorabilia, especially something from an iconic scene like that, becomes available, people go nuts for it. People will pay a lot of money for it. And if she got the autographs of all the cast members in it, that would make that book worth so much.
Oh, yeah, 100%. So maybe she did. Hopefully. I don't know. Probably not.
Maybe.
But we'll have to wait and see, Jeff.
Overall, after watching this interview, what was your overall impression?
I think for me that it was nice to hear some of the behind the scenes information, which I always find really interesting, and just kind of confirmed that Leigh Bardugo is a cool, badass, and she is excited to have people interact with her content that she's making, and excited to have people either riff on it or create things from it. And she loves the world that she created, and she loves the people who love what she does. And that's what I kind of came away from it with.
I love that.
What about you, Jeff?
My overall takeaway was, she mentioned at some point, I forget the context for this, but she said all critiques are valid.
Mm-hmm.
So she is open to taking criticism. She knows that what she has created with these books and what's going to happen with the show, they're going to, like we said, coexist. And either way, she's okay with what happens because she's a creative person. Her creativity is being recognized and appreciated on a very large scale. And yet she remains such an accessible and humble person. Like, she hasn't let that affect her. And it helps, I think, that the first exposure I have to a live conversation with her was in the same format that you and I used to record our podcast about her. Because we hop on Zoom or Skype all the time, and that's how this thing was conducted. That's how we saw it. We saw it through a Zoom call. So it almost felt a little bit like, until I saw all the questions pouring in, and they mentioned, I think at one point, how many people were streaming the event.
Yeah, it felt like a one-on-one kind of thing.
Yeah, because when you're seeing when you see a conversation like this in a convention hall, there's hundreds and hundreds of people. Like, imagine going to a panel for one of those Marvel movies or a popular TV show at Comic-Con.
You get so lost in there.
Yeah, it's a sea of people. But in this case, you and I were chatting with each other the whole time we were watching this because we can't help ourselves. But other than that, it just felt like it was you and the host and the person being interviewed. It felt much more intimate than a huge panel would at a big convention, and I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed that portion of it too, and definitely, it was nice to feel up close and personal with her. So definitely, I would definitely go see her at any convention or Comic-Con that I happen to be at if she was doing a panel, but this was kind of a unique opportunity, and definitely one that I'm glad that we took advantage of, and that I very promptly jumped on top of as soon as I got her email. T-minus like 30 seconds, and Juliana was already signing everyone and their brother up for this. But that's just how we roll, right, Jeff?
It is indeed.
Making things happen. But I think that's all we have for this little bonus episode. So listeners, thank you so much for listening, and check out our main feed for the next episode, which comes out every other Thursday. And thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed these episodes. And if you like this episode, or if you have any feedback, comment, concerns, questions, anything that you would like to say, you can send it to intothefoldpod@gmail.com, or you can hit us up at intothefoldpod on Twitter and Instagram. So, Jeff, until next time,
we will see you in the next bonus episode.
Boop, 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 boop.